there's this very human thing that we do where when we take something on, we become that thing. I'm a homeschooler. And so for parents who are not ready to wear the label, well, why don't you take the next quarter and experiment with it and see how it goes? Worst case scenario is you go back to the school you were in before. You don't have to do this forever. And you can see people relax. They're like, oh.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Danielle Strachman. Danielle was one of the original operators of the Teal Fellowship, a program started by Peter Teal that gives $100,000 to young people to drop out of college and go build something. And she's one of the co-founders of 1517 Fund, where she now works, which is a VC firm that backs young people building companies and supports people who are entrepreneurs who have gone through non-traditional education paths, primarily people who have opted or dropped out of college. In today's episode, Danielle and I talk about some of the young people that she's worked with through 1517. We talk about the types of people that she is looking for to back with her fund. We talk about how to raise young people who have high agency, high drive, high creativity and ambition, and some of the ways that the system is perhaps failing them. And we talk about what we call glitch in the matrix moments, which are moments where you realize that the world is perhaps more malleable than you once thought, and that you have more agency to create the world around you, which for many people is often that first glimmer of the entrepreneurial or creative spark before they go on to build great things. I always deeply enjoy talking to Danielle. I was so excited that she was in Austin so I could have the chance to have her on the podcast. And I hope you enjoy listening. Danielle, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Hannah.
I've been so excited about this when you said you were coming to Austin.
Oh, I feel very honored, and I'm even a little bit nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I'm not that big yet. Give me 2
You're big
years.
To me. I'm like, oh my gosh, on my Twitter feed, it's rebel educator. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, I met somebody at your event yesterday. He was like, I keep seeing tweets from you. I was like, have you followed me? He's like, no, but
You're like, why not?
I think he did by the end of the day.
I think so too. But I think everyone followed by the end of the day.
I hope so. That's the idea. Yeah. You must, spread the good word. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I know I show up in people's feeds. I get that a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that just means that I have an obsessive Twitter habit.
Well, like you talked about yesterday, the internet is hungry for truth, mm-hmm. and you're putting it out there, and people are responding to that.
Yeah, people are really hungry for this.
Yeah, very.
I kind of knew that. I definitely knew that mm-hmm. when I started, but it's both reaffirming and also very mm-hmm. exciting to see how excited people get about, mm-hmm. Saying things that are not just the status quo about education. Yeah, and I think it's been really interesting, actually, since starting the podcast a few months ago, seeing, because I'm cropping clips from every episode and I'm sharing them more on Instagram than on Twitter. So you've probably seen some stuff on Twitter, but I have most days I'm posting short reels on Instagram. And it's just it's a really good litmus test on what things strike a nerve. And the things that have really hit and have gone either semi-viral or full-on viral have been talking about just how much we're missing about the potential of kids, which is part of why I'm so excited to have you on the show, because that's your jam.
Yeah.
But it's a range. It's everything from, sort of mourning the tragedy of the way that we educate kids and how, honestly, kind of inhumane it is, mm-hmm. all the way through to kids have so much potential and why are we not taking advantage of it?
Yeah.
But the feelings of being a fan go right back to you and what you're doing. I remember when I first met you, I was working for Praxis, and I think I got to interview you for a Praxis workshop or something.
Really?
I think
I don't remember.
Either I interviewed you or somebody else did, and I got to be on the call. But either way, I was I get to meet the 1517 people. They're so cool. So it's very exciting to have you here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
So I want to talk a little bit. Let's set the stage first by
just describing what 1517 is. I had Michael on the show a few months ago, so some people have heard that episode and are familiar. But just really briefly, I want to lay the groundwork for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into all the nitty gritty of how you got here, how you do the work that you do, how you support kids, all that kind of stuff. But what is 1517 Fund?
So 1517 is an anti-establishment educational institution. A lot of people think, oh, they're a VC fund. And that's how we do the work that we do. I would describe that like a tool. It's the hammer in which we execute on our work. But what we really want to do is we call it building an invisible college. And actually, we also work a lot with high schoolers now, too. So, something about being able to build this institution where people are educating themselves, working with each other, and really having a lot of agency and autonomy. The way that we got started is Michael and I were at the Teal Fellowship in the very early years, from really day one, building that program out on the founding team. And 5 years in, what we noticed was there was really a gap in the market we noticed that the young people we were working with, like Laura Deming with the Longevity Fund, Dylan Field with Figma, Vitalik with Ethereum, we're all building incredible things, but it was also still pretty difficult to get investors to take those people seriously. So Michael and I said, if investors aren't going to take the young people we work with seriously, maybe we'll just become investors. And that's how we got started. And so we have a strong mission to work with people who are getting their education by building a project or a company outside of a tracked institution. So most of the people that we work with do not have a college degree. We will break that thesis in the name of science fiction. So if someone comes to us with super cutting edge sci-fi stuff, like way out there, we're like, okay, you have a PhD and you're doing quantum computing. All right, we think our dropouts won't be mad if we do that, but we're not going to fund like someone with a degree who's doing B2B SaaS or something like that, because that's just outside of our purview.
So the anti-establishment education institution, that's the word. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Invisible college is slightly less intuitive.
Sure.
Talk about what that means.
So invisible college for us, and there's a historic reference around the invisible college. And actually, I'm like, I should have looked up exactly what that reference is. Michael on our team and my co-founder is fantastic at naming things. He's the one who came up with 1517 and also the sense of the invisible college. So sometimes we'll take things from the past or from other contexts and pull them into what we're doing to sort of make a tweak on it. Mm-hmm. But for us, the invisible college is like, this is a way of doing a decentralized platform on how people learn and educate themselves and further their careers and their lives. But we pay them to do it instead of them paying us to do it. And so it's really about giving young people, teens, people who are foregoing that tracked institution resources to be able to do what they want to do in the future. And one thing I've just noticed over my whole career is young people are used to winning a prize for something they've already done, like science fair, things like that. But they're not used to being given resources for their potential in the future. And that's what we do. So we'll say, hey, you have something really, really interesting here. We have a grant program we run. We call the Medici Project. So sometimes we'll start with a grant. Sometimes we'll start with a smaller R&D investment. Sometimes we'll start with a more like pre-seed level investment of $500K to $1 million to say, hey, we think that you have a lot of potential. You have a lot of characteristics that we look for, and we want to give you resources to see this through. And sometimes those resources aren't just about, can this, for us to stay in business, we have to have some percentage of folks who start something that could be a venture backable company and VC scalable company. But the other part for us that's important is this idea of that some questions should be answered, especially in the scientific realm of, hey, is this person's theory going to work on something? And it's worth putting money into that, even if the answer is no, it didn't work. It was still worth putting those resources into that person and into their topic area to figure that out.
I want to talk a little bit more about the educational component of what you do, because this is one of the things that I've always really admired about you is you guys have such a great network of people, and everyone I've ever met through 1517 has been amazing. you have such a great network of people. You throw amazing events. You have, it seems like such a deep list of experts and connections and resources on any topic that somebody might be interested in. And you are very focused on making sure that you're educating the person doing the work. And a lot of the learning comes through hands-on doing, but you're also really supporting their development across the board. And I want to know more about how you think about the invisible college metaphor component of that. We'll talk about the project side of this in a little bit, like the actual doing, but you create such a resource-rich environment for people to be doing. And I want to know more both about what the mechanics of that look like, but also about how you think about it.
Yeah, one of the ways that I think about that is that I think there's this misnomer out there that high agency people don't need support, that you just sort of like, cut the leash and let them go free and they're like good to go. And in some sense, there is truth in that. But I think there's a deeper truth that high agency people still need support. It just looks different. And I actually think most young people, children and teens, are very high agency, and it's that we squash them through the systems that we have and then say, no, you have to do it this way, and you have to do it on this schedule and this timeline and so on. And so at 15, 17, and I said this a lot at the Teal Foundation too, when we were running the Teal Fellowship, it was more like we were a buffet table of offerings of, hey, we have workshops on things, we have community events, come partake of the buffet table. And if you're hungry, we have things for you. And if you're not hungry for something at the buffet table, don't come and eat. Like, you don't need to have, every single dish that is there. You need what is relevant. One of the things that we learned working with high agency young people is that learning and things being relevant at the time were very important, which sometimes for me as an educator would be a little bit frustrating. Like we had a great person come in and give a whole workshop on negotiations. And in my mind, I'm always thinking forward of, you're negotiating every day of your life. Like, this is relevant for everybody. But what a lot of young people want is, like, when the house is slightly on fire, that's when they want the learning of something of like, oh, I'm going to be doing a contract and I better learn how to negotiate. And, part of me is like, but you're doing this all the time. Like, but like, it's, sometimes I call that like a horse to water problem, where it's like, okay, well, if someone's not ready to drink yet, I'm not going to force them to drink, but when they're ready, these resources are here for them. And then a few things that we do with 15, 17, and we did this with the fellowship as well, is we have regular check-ins with the people that we work with, and it's on the calendar, ready to go. I think in the investment world, a lot of investors are very reactionary. They'll see an article in the news about something or get a behind-the-scenes tip about something and text a founder and say, oh, God, like, what do you think about this? We got to talk about that. Or, what are you going to do about this problem? And we're a lot more proactive rather than reactive. So very little surprises us. And it's, again, that framework that works for high agency people, where we're here to be proactive but not annoying, and work with them and check in. I sometimes jokingly say that our founders are allowed to be as annoying to us as they want. But for us, it's like, okay, like, yeah, we want to check in and see how things are doing, but we also don't want to be getting in the way of their work. And certainly our purview is that if we thought we had to go in and manage something for any of the people we work with, whether grantees, mentees, portfolio companies, that's the wrong move, because we want them to do the learning by doing. And of course, we'll connect them with people who have, experience, or other founders who might be a couple years ahead of them. But it's about making that connection happen and that relationship happen, more so than us saying, like, we know how you should do this. And in fact, I call VC advanced tutoring, but our founders are tutoring us all day long. We're constantly getting to learn about their industries and specialties. And it's a really special thing to be part of, to have people coming to us and saying, hey, here's the cutting edge of X, Y, and Z. I'm like, wow, okay, this is all right. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm ready. Keep teaching me.
One of the things that I really love about your philosophy is first of all, the fact that you just said that you are paying kids to learn instead of them paying someone else to passively learn. I think there's a lot of potential that we leave on the table on like a broad economic scale for learning to happen in that way. So my very first job out of high school that was like a real job, not just like working somewhere locally, was Praxis.
Yeah.
And, I was this fresh out of high school kid going to work for this startup that was helping people land jobs at startups. And it was really exciting. And I was just trying to figure out how to be successful without college. And so I was like, well, theoretically I can do this because people like Zach Slayback, who now works with you, are writing blog posts about how they dropped out of the University of Pennsylvania to go work for Praxis. And so I should just go learn from them, right? So I went to work at the company that was teaching people how to be successful without college, to figure out how to be successful without college, but they paid me to be there instead of me. I kind of hacked the program actually because they were recruiting me to do the program, and then they were hiring an intern at the same time. And I was like, well, how about I do that and you pay me to be here and to learn?
Perfect.
But I think that shaped, like on a personal level, that shaped my philosophy very early on, that if I want to learn something, I can go find somebody who needs me to do the thing that I want to learn, and then I'll learn how to do it by doing it, and I'll get paid for it.
Yep.
And I think it's really weird that we don't default to that more often. The idea that you can be economically
involved,
successful. Well, as a you can be economically involved, but you can also you can have income while learning. It doesn't have to be you pay money to learn and then you go do the thing afterwards.
Absolutely.
And I love that you are building this pipeline where kids can be interested in something and find funding to go learn the thing. I wish on a broad cultural level we thought that way, because it's not every kid wants to go has a big thesis and wants to go start a company, but they might want to learn how to do social media marketing, go work for a company and learn how to do it while you're there.
No, absolutely. There's a few things I want to hit on there. One is I'm a really big proponent of getting young people back in the workforce, because I think that especially when people like teens are removed from that and removed from being able to fund themselves, they are at a lack for opportunity there. And I think society would be very, very different if we said, okay, you can open your own bank account and your parent can't touch it when you're 12 or whatever. And then ongoing from there and being able to find these types of opportunities. Additionally, to your point about being paid to learn, things like internships are a great way to do that. And I think too much now, I think people rely too much on structures to give them these opportunities instead of finding them and, looking for their high school or their college to say, oh, here's these internship opportunities, you should apply for these. And one thing I would implore, anyone listening to do would be, if you find something that you're interested in, walk in the door. And for me growing up, I did a lot of that. My first job was at a pet store, and I volunteered when I was 14 years old and walked in and said, I love hamsters. I love all the mammals. I will, be here and, do animal handling, make them more friendly for you, and pay me in rabbit food because you can't pay me in, actual cash right now, and so on. And then when I was in college, I got very interested in neurology, and I happened to be across the street from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And I just walked in one day after reading about their work and walked up to the admin table, and they're like, oh, who are you here to see? And I was like, I don't have an appointment, but I'd love to talk to Dr. Margaret O'Connor. And they were like, you don't have an appointment? I was like, no, I'm just, from the school across the street. I just thought I'd come in and say hi. And they were like, okay, well, she's, in meetings all day, and if she has some time, she'll come out. Eventually she came out and she's like, sorry, who are you? And I was like, I'm Danielle, and I'm really excited about what you're doing here with the different neuropsych testing you're doing. And I would love to shadow you for a day to just check this out. And she's like, wow, we've never had an undergrad in here, but sure, come back. And it was this thing where over a short period of time, I went from just doing observations there to they saw that, oh, okay, she shows up on time. She dresses for the role. This was a hospital, so, had to have a conservative look. They said they had never had interns before because sometimes people would just dress really inappropriately for the hospital. I was like, oh, I never even have thought of that. And then eventually they were like, hey, would you want to learn, how to do this and we'll pay you for an internship? And I was like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. And so, yeah, I was paid to learn on the job. And then it was my first job after that and went from there. But it was just like putting myself in the position of going in and talking to the people there and just seeing what happened and also asking for something that was, I think, an easier yes to start with of like, oh, can I just shadow you for a day? And like just building it up from there. And I talk to founders about this a lot too, because sometimes they'll say like, well, how do I find a co-founder? And I'm like, well, you don't go in with the engagement ring, like a date. You're not like, hey, do you want to be my co-founder right off the bat? Like, hey, let's work together for a day. Hey, let's do a little bit more this weekend. Hey, you know what? We are just really vibing super good on this. Like, let's do more. And from there. So I find that strategy to work well. But I think there's lots of opportunities, to be able to get paid to learn. But sometimes we have to go around the system to do it and not assume that the system is going to provide that for us because the system is built on us paying them. So they're not thinking in this bi-directional, transactional way. It's more one way.
I have two completely unrelated thoughts to what you just said. The first is that there's been this series of videos circulating on social media, especially on Instagram. And I actually don't know if they're all related to each other, if there's some weird train of thought moving through the collective psyche about this and people keep making videos about it. But I keep seeing these videos crop up that are about the things that you learn at elite schools, like prep schools. And the core thesis of these 60-second videos is that in these elite schools, you're prepped for leadership roles. So you're learning how to think more like a leader. And one of them was talking about how when you go to a normal school, you learn to defer to gatekeepers. And so you're waiting for someone
to give you permission.
Yes. Or if you're applying for a job, you just look for the job postings you fill out the application on Indeed or LinkedIn or whatever, and then you wait to hear back.
Right.
But the point that they were making in this video is that at the elite schools, you would go knock on the door, or you'd go set up a meeting, or you'd email the CEO, or you'd like ask, could I get coffee with somebody?
Right. Yep.
And you'd actually take initiative in making a connection happen. And the point was that that's someone learning how to move to the front of the line instead of just waiting for the world to happen to say, oh, this person looks interesting, I'll take a chance on them.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've had friends tell me that who have gone to schools like that, they're like, yeah, I really don't feel like there's that much difference really in like your average like high level private school versus public school. Like I didn't really feel like we learned that. But I watched this video and I was like, that's what I learned how to do working at Praxis. Like, this is what we taught everybody. This is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I actually don't think, people look to elite schools as having the answers for how to take initiative in the world. And the elite schools aren't, I don't think, as far as I can tell, doing it much better than the average school. It's the same model, and the model itself is based on deference, not initiative.
Right.
But it's the people who are doing what you're doing and the people who are teaching kids how to do everything from apprenticeships and internships to full-on entrepreneurship who are actually teaching these skills. But these skills are such a life hack because if you're able to do these things, you're able to, the world is your oyster, quite literally. If you're willing to go knock on doors, you could have knocked on any door at any type of industry, anywhere in your city. And to varying levels of engagement, depending on the individual people involved, you probably would have gotten a fairly similar response. People would have been like, I don't think it was a fluke that you just happened to walk in the right place.
Right. No.
It was the way that you did it. And you could have done that anywhere. And you can do that ad infinitum with as many things as you're interested in. And it's this weirdly well-kept secret where you can wake up on any given morning and just be like, you know what? I want to play in the world this way today.
Yeah.
And you can.
Yeah.
But somehow just it's not obvious in it's like this weird blind spot that we have culturally. The other thing that I think is really interesting about what you just said is that we have everything about our institutions is structured to keep us segmented. And there are these, there's this continuum of segments of your life, and you move through them one at a time. And first you're in school, and then you're in higher education, and then you're in the workforce, and then you're retired, and then eventually you're in, a retirement community or a nursing home. Then we get there. But there's this weird divide between each of those things. Like people in a nursing home always get really excited when a young person comes in because they don't see kids very often. And it's, usually someone's grandkid and, but everyone's excited to see the happy, energetic children come in. And, young kids in the early levels of school get really excited to see older kids because they're hardwired to admire older kids and look at them as role models. But they don't see them very often because there's this divide where, you stay in your room over here and you stay in your room over here, but we're both inside the school and we stay here all day while the other people go to these other buildings and they go to work because they're adults. And so there's this weird lack of overlap. And the overlap is so necessary for natural development and for learning, because so much of our learning is just we're sponges and we just absorb osmosis, by watching someone who's farther along than we are. But there's also this weird starvation that happens across the different subsegments where I talk to so many people who are established in their careers who are just starving for young talent. They're so excited when somebody who's young and a little bit ambitious and has enough, integrity and competence that, like you said, they can show up on time and they know how to dress for the role and they can be reliable. And like, really, that's all you need to start learning things and be useful in a base level way. So many people I talk to are just starving for young people like that, and they can't find it. And they can't find them because there's this institutional divide across our entire culture. But when you start to circumvent these artificial barriers that are put up, or in our heads, we're like, no, there's this wall, like I'm not out of college yet, so I can't be in the workforce. But it's like, nobody's actually stopping you. You just think you're supposed to not go over there, but you totally can. If you start circumventing that, there's a whole world waiting for you that's going to be so excited that you're coming to engage because they've been looking for you and they didn't know where to find you. And so there's just, I love how many, it's so intuitive, everything that you're talking about, but it's also such a paradigm shift. And it's weird to me that it needs to be a paradigm shift because it seems like it should be intuitive.
Well, and what I find interesting too is I love observing really small children, because I think when you go back and you watch and interact with small children, they have a lot of this stuff down pat. Like they're not afraid to say anything that they're thinking, or ask questions, or just go up to anybody in the room. Like young children are natural salespeople. And again, it's this process of our institutions like cover and sometimes shame children for these very natural abilities. So to me, a lot of this paradigm shifting is like peeling back layers like an onion of, okay, let's get back to those things you naturally had when you were really, really small and make those things okay again. And it's surprisingly challenging to do that, but I love to observe little kids because they, that's funny that I use little kids. I don't like the word kids. I have a whole rant about the word kids.
And yet you follow me on Twitter. I use the word kid all the time.
So it's like, yes, this should have been my hot take we did hot takes on our event yesterday. And this should have been my hot take is like, I hate the word kids. I think using the word kids is fine, like within your own family and things like that. But whenever I meet people who work with young people, for me, it's a little bit of a signal of that there's still a hierarchy there of, oh, this person's a program director of something and they're calling the people they work with kids. Like, so it's sort of and kids is slang. Kids actually is a word for a baby goat. Like, and I'm like, okay, like I call my godchildren kids. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, they're part of my family. They're my kids. But yeah, I always use young people, teens, children, like trying to keep it a little bit more formal because they have, like, there's already sort of that hierarchy just from, being older, bigger, more experienced, like all this stuff. So I try to keep my language. There's like a reverence that I think is really important to keep for humankind, period. And so that's why I don't use the word kids. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I said it.
That's so interesting because using kids so much was a deliberate choice for me because I felt like so many people, I wanted a level of informality in the language that I was using around talking about education in the context of Rebel Educator, because so often people are, you know, they talk about children and it just feels very formal and stuffy.
Sure.
And I completely understand what you're saying about reverence. And I agree with you completely that reverence needs to be there. And I think different words evoke it in different ways for different people. But saying kids was also a very deliberate choice for me because I wanted to be talking about the young people in a way that
elevating
felt
them.
Yeah, it's like, you know, they're young and they're wild and they should be young and wild. They shouldn't be like, you know, their shoes all nicely laced up and they're like all sitting neatly in rows. And I feel like, you know, there's this very stuff like the children must behave themselves. They must be seen and not heard that I was trying not to evoke.
Interesting. I use young people a lot, even to refer to like little ones. One of my colleagues is really funny. He knows I have this like response to the word kids. And what's funny is when I was running the Teal Fellowship, and when we often had the current class of Teal Fellows help with the selection of the new, and they would use the word kids a lot. They're like, wow, this kid's amazing. And at that, I was like, hey, you're on a peer level. This is totally fine. And one of those old Teal Fellows works with us now, Alex Karen, and he was using kids recently. And it was just really funny because then, you know, I was like, hey, I just have this thing about it. And like, you can say it. Like, I just, just going to let you know. And now he'll say lads and lasses. It's like working with the lads and lasses. And I'm like, that's so good.
That's really good.
Yeah, he so cracks me up.
I wonder what would happen if I did that on Twitter. I don't think people would get it.
Right. Yeah.
They'd be like, who took over your account
Right.
and why?
Right.
Why did you let them?
Exactly. Like this is the alternate, like, I don't know, Ireland version of Rebel Educator.
Yeah. People already think I'm Irish enough with the red hair. I don't need to feed that fire by starting to use lads and lasses.
Totally.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the types of young people. I'm gonna try to adhere to your
kids. You can use kids.
I wanna maintain your frame around how you talk about this to some extent because I probably will not remember, but we're gonna try. But I want to, for the context of this conversation, I want to respect even the language that you use to describe it because I think that that's like part of the story that you're telling. These kids that you're working with. What types of young people are you looking for? And also both in terms of age range, but also like what types of people find you or what types of people are you going out looking for? What are they? What's the archetype or archetypes?
Yeah. The word that comes to mind is curious. People who are really insatiably curious, hungry to discover things. I was talking to someone recently who was telling me there are two flavors of curiosity. There are people who ask lots of questions and sort of want to dig in there, but then there are the people who want to sort of get their hands on things and do experiments. And we very much, want both of those qualities in the types of people that we're working with. And even for myself, I actually wish I was a little bit more of the type 2 curious of like, put my hands on something and do it. I have all these projects I want to do and I get stopped up about doing them. I'm like, we work with all these people who have that, like, I'm going to get in there. I'm like, all right, I got to get in there more. But a couple things to note. One is that with 15, 17, we do work with young people a lot. But our thesis is really for anyone who has gone an alternate route. So we have 16-year-olds who we have funded, both with grants and venture dollars. And we have people who are in their 60s who never got their college degree. And we're like, cool, you fit our thesis. This is awesome. So it's really about narrative over age. I would say the majority of people we work with are probably maybe like early mid 20s ish. Although it's been really fun because in the last couple of years, we had this insight on the team of like, we've got to go younger. Like, let's do more stuff at high schools. We just did an experiment running our first camp, which had 14 to 19-year-olds. And going back to what you were saying about putting people in these like same age boxes, it was really interesting. We ran this camp, we called it 2E, and we called it 2E to reference the twice exceptional idea within like gifted and special education realms, but sort of wanting to reclaim it. So this idea of working with twice exceptional people who may be very advanced in some areas, but also have areas that we're all working on. And I think most of us have these things. So we wanted to sort of like reclaim that term. And we had 14 through 19-year-olds there. And it was really interesting because I was going back to some of my education days and I worked with homeschoolers a lot. And I love multi-age and multi-skill and multi-development, all of it. And I was also a little bit nervous because I was like, 14 to 19 is a pretty big developmental spread. Like, I'm curious how this will go. And we had the teens come for, I guess it was a Thursday through Monday, so a few days, and they just gelled beautifully with each other, and were able to really honor where each other were, both intellectually and developmentally on all kinds of things. And it was interesting to see my own bias kick in a little bit about like, oh, okay, maybe some of them will be like so far away from each other, but it's like, nope, we got them all in this group and collaborating and working together. And it didn't need to be, oh, we picked, because originally when we were thinking about this camp, we thought, okay, we probably wanted to stick to like 14 to 16, like a little bit closer of a range. And people just kept applying who were like, oh, this person's great too. Okay, all right, oh, they're 18. All right, that's fine. Like, oh, they're 19. Okay, sure, let's do it. And it was this really beautiful molding of a group. And so curiosity was one of the things that we looked for within people. We also looked for genuineness. And I think this is something that we also look for in the founders we work with. And we ask this question of, tell me about something that you like to do for fun. And we put a light application out for coming to the camp, just as mostly sort of an experiment to see like what could we learn about people before they arrived. And what I noticed, and it really pained me, was so many of the young people interpreted the question more like that college application question of like, oh, this is the gotcha where I'm supposed to say something about me that's awesome and
I like
inflate
to feed
myself.
Homeless cats on the weekends because
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's
my favorite hobby.
That I would have taken actually. It's more the like, I wrote a book, I started a podcast, I love the nonprofit that does X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, these are the like college application check boxes now, and these pressures that have come down to young people these days. And there was a young woman who applied and she had answered the question. And one question we also asked was, what's something you're rationally passionate about? Like that you could just go on for days and days. And I gave an example. My example is the founding of Dippin' Dots. Like that story is very fascinating to me. And I went down this bizarre rabbit hole about it. And I was like, so it doesn't have to be like hyper geeky physics. It can be whatever it is. So we want people who are, going to go deep in all kinds of areas. And then we asked this, what do you do for fun question? And this one young woman answered, her irrational, passionate question with sort of like a pretty STEM oriented thing. But then on the what do you like to do for fun? She said she loves cooking Lebanese food with her grandma. And I was like, this is who I'm looking for. This is the person who's like someone who can clearly dive down those rabbit holes, but really have that like genuine nature to them also.
Mm-hmm.
And we look for that in the founders we work with as well. Like you have to be, the term that we use is egoless ambition, people who have a real mission of what they're serving and what they're doing. But it's not about them, it's about being of service. And so those are a few qualities that we look for that are just really important to us. And I just feel very blessed to be able to work with people who embody these things because it's so charming to be around them. And people who can also sort of let their guard down on like, oh, I need to fit in this box of, being the I don't even know, like hyper achieving, like aggressive collegiate checkboxing student, and people who can also just be themselves and bring their weirdness with them. What was really fun about this camp too is that we had people who were very STEM focused. We had a few young people who were super into like old time war strategy and weapons and like old school stuff is very interesting. We had people in the arts also, and it was just this really neat blend. And my hope over time is to see what happens for them having had this event as a fork in the road of like, hey, we did a field trip day where we took people around to different deep tech companies that are all teams of like 2 or 3 people getting started really early and showing them, hey, look, this is what you can do in a garage and, some friends and some resources. And I'm really curious to see in like a 5-ish year period, like, was this a turning point for anyone in terms of what they thought was possible and where they could take that agency they have now, and what they could do with that, like today and tomorrow.
How much do you think that the work that you're doing is opening up that awareness of what's possible versus working with kids who somehow have already found that?
It's a lot of both. So the community building we do is a lot more of the former of, hey, let's get other like-minded young people together at our summits and different events so that they can see, one, they're not alone. That's huge. The phrase we've heard ever since the Teal Fellowship finalist days was, I don't get to meet other young people like me. And it blows my mind that we're 13 years in and I still hear that same phrase. And we don't seed that phrase to the group. We're not like, oh, you finally get to meet other young people like you. It's like, no, we just keep hearing that, which I actually find like deeply sad. Like, oh man, it's still hard for these people to find each other. And so we do want sort of our anti-establishment educational institution to be a platform for people to see like, oh, okay, like I talked to another 16-year-old who's doing all these neat things and yeah, maybe I can start taking the leap to do that. And then within the portfolio, we are certainly working with people who have already embodied some of these ideas, but I also think there's a real strength to giving resources and real resources in the terms of dollar amounts because it makes it tangible. Oh, these people aren't just patting me on the back saying I'm doing good work. They're giving me money to do it. Like it's very real. And I think that actually builds trust as well when someone says like, hey, not only am I saying you're like good at something and have potential and whatnot, but like you're putting resources behind it to have me do more. Like how strange and novel. And it's becoming less strange and novel, which is good. There's other programs out there, 776, the Teal Fellowship is still going. There's lots of different grant programs, and I'm glad to see that expanding. But like my take is that I would love to see more fellowship programs and things like that to support young people, because I think a lot of different innovation can come out of those young people feeling believed in and trusted.
I know that a big part of your thesis at 1517 is the innovation thing.
Mm-hmm.
The what's the word that what's the right way to describe this? I want to say like the drought in innovation perhaps that we're experiencing.
Yep.
The cultural starvation for innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Michael about this some when he came on the show. and this was one of my favorite things about his book too, is just how eloquently he was describing all of this. And, a lot of people talk about Peter Thiel talks about it, Eric Weinstein talks about it. How much of what you're doing is motivated by that, by wanting to see more innovation in the world, not just in terms of, because I think every VC wants to, I want to see the people that I'm backing build something new, because that's how we see a return in the fund, and that's, how the economy grows and all these things. But on a more philosophical level, wanting to see more innovation in the name of human flourishing versus the other things that you've talked about that are also motivating what you're doing.
Yeah, that's really important. Like, the way I think about it is making a dent in the universe of what are the things that people can build that in, 10 or 15 years time would have an outsized impact on those arenas. And so we think about that a lot when we're making an investment. One of the ways we love litmus tests at 15, 17, and that's sort of a way to get at some like guttural senses around things. And one of the litmus tests would be, would our parents be proud of like what's on the website? And of course, our parents are very complimentary, so they'd probably be like, "We love everything." I'm like, no. Like, I want you to actually be proud of what's on there, and would we also be proud of what is on there? And capital is a way to incentivize what happens in the world, and I think the more that we are putting weight behind problems and hard technologies, it influences the ecosystem to do so. So that's really important to us. And of course, being able to solve problems and have human flourishing and make people's lives better is extremely important to us at 15, 17, and to me. And so we think about that a lot. And a lot of the young people we do work with, because they are making this leap to say, like, I'm going to buck a social system, meaning their families, when grandma is not happy about what you're doing because you're not in school and it doesn't make sense and things like that, like, you have to do it in the name of something that you really, really care about, because otherwise, like, the societal and familial pressure is just very high to keep doing the thing that everyone else is doing and do the normal thing and so on. So we see that in a lot of the founders that we work with, that there's just this, like, I will die on my sword to do this. And it means that if I need to, have more time and energy, and that means not going to school to do it, that's what I'm going to do, because the time is now. At the foundation, we used to say some ideas just can't wait. And that is something that we still hold really near and dear.
Today's episode is brought to you by the John Galt Mortgage Company. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with the John Galt Mortgage Company, which was started by my friends Mitch and Tim earlier this year. Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they realized over time that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. Most real estate agents don't even realize how much extra profit is baked into the cost. So Mitch and Tim decided to build a new kind of mortgage, one where they voluntarily cap their own profit on every transaction and pass the savings along to you, the buyer, in the form of a lower interest rate. When I'm buying a house, I will absolutely be working with them. And if you're in the market for a house, you should too. You can find more about what they're doing at johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find a link to their site down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show.
I want to do a little bit of myth busting.
All right, sure.
Because there are a lot of cultural myths that apply to the work that you do. And I think some of them are a little more, the answers are a little bit more obvious. Like, you need to have a college degree to be successful. It's like, well, look at everyone who goes through 15, 17 and builds something. Not true. Yep. But I think there's a layer deeper to that. There's another layer to that myth that I think people also get stuck on. I hear this a weird amount of times. You'll say, kids don't need college to be successful, or like kids can not go to college and they can go start a company instead. And somebody will come in your comments and say, well, not everybody's going to be the next Steve Jobs. Like, there are only so many Steve Jobs in the world, and that's not good advice for most kids. And yet you work with people who are interested in a very wide array of types of projects and at varying levels of ambition with those projects. And you also, because you have different layer or levels to how you can support people, you're able to support projects at varying levels of scale.
Yep.
So what would you say to someone whose response to don't go to college, build a company instead is, well, that's not good advice for most kids because most kids, they're not going to be the next Vitalik. Most kids aren't going to start Ethereum. So, you know, you really should just like not be telling them to go throw this trajectory away that's guaranteed to give them, you know, a mortgage and a pension and all these things that they aspire to.
For me, I think the deeper layer there isn't telling people or the message of don't go to college. For me, the message is have conscious decision making about your future. And so for some people, that might be college. That might be, hey, this is an environment that is supportive and I'm learning the things I want to learn and I'm not coming out in debt. Maybe I have a scholarship. And that's the place for them to be. For some people, that is going to be finding other resources to build a company. For other young people, that's going to be looking to get hired by different places. And so there's this sort of like scaffolded, it's not just college or you become Steve Jobs. And a lot of big institutions have now taken away the college degree requirement. And I think that's really wonderful. And actually, something that I've been banging the drum on since the Teal Fellowship days is I really think K through 12 changes when not higher ed changes or is somehow, I don't know, gone or whatever, but it's really the job market. It's about getting into the economy again. And when employers say, hey, you know what, we're going to train you up, we're going to pay you to train you up, then that is the place where things change. And I think what happens at the hiring level is they're looking at school as a proxy of ability and assessment. And assessment is very difficult to do and to do well. And so I understand that hiring institutions are leaning on that, but less and less are. And so it's about these different arenas. And there's also boot camps now and gap year programs and all kinds of different things. And so to me, it's about looking at, parents talk about opportunities for their children a lot. And it's about looking at what are all the different types of opportunities now, whether it's school, a gap year program, an internship somewhere, you know, apprenticeship models. The trades are coming back, which I think is fantastic. And maybe it's also starting a company. But I always tell people, if someone came to me and said, oh, Danielle, I heard about 1517 and I just dropped out of school, I'd be like, whoa, hold on. Like, and not, whoa, hold on, you should stay in school, but more like whether it's school or a project or a startup, I think you need to be dropping into something. And you need to drop into what that thing is in your life that you want to be doing. And that could be working for somebody else. It doesn't matter to me what it is, but it's about that conscientious decision making and considering the opportunities on the table and how they are different than they used to be. So that's what I tend to say to people is that it's not really about like, don't go to school. It's more make a conscientious decision. And maybe that means you go to school for a quarter. Maybe you never go. Maybe you go the whole time. And it's also about looking at making each decision over time and being open to reconsidering what you thought before, which is very difficult to do. I talk with parents who think about homeschooling in this way a lot. Like there's this very human thing that we do where when we take something on, we become that thing. I'm a homeschooler. Like, and so for parents who are not ready to like wear the label, you know, and I've never been someone who likes labels of really any kind. So I really understand that visceral, like, oh gosh, like, what does this mean if I'm becoming a thing? But what I'll tell parents when they're thinking about it is, well, why don't you take the next quarter and experiment with it and see how it goes? Like, worst case scenario is you go back to the school you were in before. Like, you don't have to do this forever. And you can see people relax. They're like, oh, that's right. I don't have to be this thing forever. And I think that's true for most of the human experience, but we get very blinded to like putting our identity with other things and not being able to observe what that thing is and if we should still be going down that particular path.
I love the dropping in, not just dropping out thing. I
Yeah.
use very similar language when I'm talking about exiting this education system. I'll tell parents often that there's sort of two categories of people who exit the system at anywhere along the conveyor belt, whether it's preschool or it's dropping out of college. There are people who are just running from.
Yep.
They're
That's
like,
right.
this is not, I don't want this. And this can be the ideology of the school, it can be the curriculum, it can be the culture, it can be a bullying student or a teacher that they don't like, but they're just trying to get away from it.
Sure.
And then there are the parents that are running towards, they see some vision of what their child's education could be, and they want that, and so they're aspirationally moving towards it as something better than, not just, this is bad, so hopefully anything else is like at least not this bad. And I think that distinction is really important, that level of purpose. And I think that that's something that we don't emphasize nearly enough in education and and not just education, because I think education's too limited a term, because it feels like a one of the things in the checklist of what's happening in childhood and early adulthood, but really it's this entire process of becoming the person that you're going to be for the rest of your life. We're not purpose driven enough about it. You work with a lot of people who are very purpose driven. Are there commonalities that you see in how these young people arrive at a place where they have some big ambition for a problem that they want to solve, or they are highly curious, or, they have the level of confidence in their own ability to play in the world where they have the audacity to think, in spite of what culture is telling them, that they could go start a company and change the world? Is it mostly nature, or are there nurture components that you also see in the backgrounds of these kids that enable them to arrive at a point where they're ready to come talk to 15, 17?
It's a great question. And I would love to dig into that more with our founders. But one of the things that we did when we were at the Teal Foundation is we did a light survey of, sort of a little bit more about upbringing. And one of the things I was particularly interested in is, did they do some form of, I was going to say like alternative. I hate the term alternative education because it makes it sound like there's the normal and then there's the not normal for the not normal people, which drives me crazy. So I think I'm like trying to on the spot be like, all right, what do I want to call it? It's like, what are the things that promote more agency and autonomy within education? And did they go to those types of environments? And I don't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but there was a large amount who had spent some amount of time in a higher agency environment, whether that was homeschooling, Montessori, Reggio Emilio, project-based learning schools, things like that. And we did find that there was a higher percent within the fellowship that had those experiences before, that I would assume had an effect on when they came into the fellowship and, hey, the world's your oyster. You have a tabla rasa right here. And now you can do what you want with it, and being able to do things like, set a vision and goals and their own schedule, even to get down into like the real nitty gritty actions. So I think those things did matter. When I would talk to parents of old fellows, I often had this sense of like play and exploration being a big part of childhood, and that being something really important to those particular families. I'm trying to think like anything else that comes to mind in that. Oh, well, on the Teal Fellow and on the founder side, when we find one of the things that we find that might be like commonality is generally the things people are working on are deeply personal to them, whether it's that they've experienced something or a family member or something like that where they want to make something better. And that is a real driving motivator. We call this sustaining motivation at 15, 17, where there's going to be that thing that has to sustain you on what you're doing. And it can't be like fame and fortune or this hope of becoming Steve Jobs or something like that, because those things are not going to get you through the dark night of the soul of what you're doing. It's going to be that you feel very personally called to like work in a particular arena. And it's interesting because, I mean, sometimes like, I think when people find themselves with a calling, it can be a huge responsibility. And we had one founder who started crying on a Zoom call with us because he's working on a cure for diabetes, and he's showing very promising results in very early stage, mouse and rat studies. But he started crying on this call, and he's like, I can't believe that I might be the person who's able to do this. And I was like, wow, holy moly, like I am touched. And like that's the level that a lot of the people that we're working with are at, where they're going to do this and it's that important for them. Where that came from, of the ability to feel free enough to find something like your calling, that's a great question. And I want to find out more about that and be like, hey, everybody, let's dig in here. Like, and can we manufacture this and put it in some of our programming and, have this, we're constantly thinking about how do we take our learnings and recycle them into all these things that we're doing so that more people can have these types of experiences.
Yeah, I would be very curious to know answers to these questions
me too.
We should talk about this. But I think what you just said is really interesting about the personal calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a loosely held hypothesis, and I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on this. I don't know how well this actually holds water.
Sure.
I'm still making sense of it. Yeah. But in my mind, there's kind of like two parallel things that have to happen for someone to be able to both think entrepreneurially, but also sustain an actual entrepreneurial venture.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is they have to learn how to see the world around them as malleable. So there's something that has to shift in their mind, where it's not just the world is the way that it is, and there's a set of rules, and your job is just to memorize the rules, and then you, within those parameters of rules, you get to choose how you engage, but you always have to be following the rules. Like someone else made them, or not even you don't even necessarily inherently realize that a person made them. You're just sort of,
you just go along with it.
Yeah, it's like, well,
you're a fish in water.
Yeah, we're all playing by these rules, right? This is just how it is.
Yep.
There's a great Steve Jobs quote about this, about how like you have to realize that the world around you is just made by people just like you. They're no smarter than you are. Right. You can change it too. And I remember I was probably 18 or 19 when I heard that, and it was like a very foundational moment in my becoming to hear that, and to just, I was just at a point where I was ready for it, and it clicked, and the world was never the same after I heard that. It was like a 1 minute long video on Facebook. It was a clip from one of his interviews, and I was just like, oh, I get it now. It's like all of a sudden you can see the code of the Matrix.
Totally.
You're like, wait, but I can move the digits around. Like I can change it too. But I think something has to happen. And we don't live in a world that
promotes that.
No, it does not create opportunities on purpose for that to happen.
No.
You have to like almost like accidentally run into a glitch somewhere in the playing rules, and they're like, wait a minute. This all moves.
Right.
But you have to realize that things are malleable, but that's not enough, like to your point, to sustain. Because I remember realizing that the world was malleable, but I've had lots of ideas for things from like, why doesn't this company exist?
Right.
Like, why has no one solved this problem? But I don't care about it enough to want to spend my nights and weekends or even my days doing this. Like, I'd be bored. I'd rather go for a walk.
Yeah.
Like, there's a million and one things I'd rather do. But you also have to start to like really get in tune with your own feelings about the world, which is another thing that we don't live in a world that's very good at that. Like, it doesn't matter what you feel. It's 10 o'clock. And so we're doing algebra.
Right.
Like, I don't care what you're, and I'm making this sound very heartless, and most people administering educations have a lot of heart, but it's like, I'm sorry, these are the rules. Like, it's 10:02 now. Like, we really need to get on this.
Yep.
But you have to like really tune into what is it that I care about? What is it that I'm both excited about and curious enough that I would want to follow this for a long time? And there's, there's so much developmentally that goes on that enables a young person to be able to do that, like building the muscle of focus and sustained attention and all of those things, which school's also really bad at because it's like segmenting out. It's like 45 minutes. Okay.
Right. Time
Next
for the
thing.
next one.
Like, sorry, we're not doing algebra anymore. Like
Right.
now it's chemistry. But it's like, but I was into
Right,
it.
you're like, I finally got deep in, like 10 minutes in, and now we got to stop. Yeah.
Sorry. Chemistry is down the hall to the left. But you also, you have to like get in tune with your own self. There's a lot of self-awareness around, like, to use your point, what you care about. I mean, I've had lots of ideas. The reason I'm doing the education thing is because it's personal
What
to me.
you care about.
Yeah. It's been my whole life has gone the way that it has because of this. And I just like really want somebody else to get to have this too.
Yeah.
It's like, if I can give that back to other kids, my gosh, like that makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
So it's personal to me.
Yeah.
But you have to have a lot of self-awareness to find that. So I don't know. I think that there's like two separate developmental things that are really important. I don't know how much water this holds, if like this maps onto your experience, if there's like core things that are missing in this.
It maps on to my own experience. It's hard for me to say how much it maps on to the experience of the people that we work with. I would really want to dive in more for them, especially the glitch in the matrix part of when do you start seeing, that it's all made up. Like, we've all made up all these things.
It really is just all made up.
Yeah. And then like, what can you do, and which knobs and dials can you turn? And you start seeing like, oh, interesting. Like, I can do things that I didn't think that I could do before. I think questioning one's self-concept is actually really, really important. That sort of has a little bit to do with this like glitch in the matrix thing, because I think we have our own thoughts about our identities too, of like, oh, well, I'm a type of person who does this and I love that, and I don't do these things, and I have a fear of heights, and so that means I limit myself in these ways. And a lot of the people that we work with, I think, question and are very reflective. Where that comes from is something that I would need to like dive into more. And I'd be really, really curious about that. Now I like want to go back and interview all the people we work with and be like, so when did you find the glitch in the matrix? Like, let's talk about that. And then I think for a lot of them on the sort of like mission passion side, to your point, it's just like this thing that you feel or know. And what I think has occurred for a lot of the young people that we work with is that they either themselves had access to the ability to like read lots of books on a topic or go on the internet and start, diving in deep. And I imagine in the best case scenarios, they probably also had environments with other people and adults in them where they might say, hey, let's go further with this. Let's like push this envelope more and see what else we can do. Or oh gosh, yeah, you seem to really, I have a cousin who took apart the lawnmower one day, and his parents, and I think this is great, were like, oh wow, like he seems to have a real like knack for mechanical stuff. Like, let's do more there, and enrolled him in all kinds of different classes, and is like, and now that's his thing. But I think sometimes it takes that noticing. There was a tweet that has always stuck out to me from over the pandemic.
Was it Rebel Educator? No,
it wasn't, but there's some really good ones there too. But the one that stuck out to me was this person said something like, my brother is so bored that all he does is play guitar all day. And I was like, my God, like, that's not boredom, that's motivation. Like, and the right thing, in my opinion, to do there is to support that and push on that further of like, interesting, cool, you're playing guitar all day. Let's like push you like further out. Like, what would be the next step in, becoming great at this? And I've had the sense that a lot of the people we work with, either of their own agency or with a support structure, were able to start doing those types of things. But now I just want to go back and interview all of them, be like, all right, glitch in the matrix, let's start there and do the rest of this.
What was your glitch in the matrix moment?
Trying to think well, what's interesting is both my parents are self-employed small business owners. And so a lot of my upbringing was, well, of course you make your own money. Of course you just randomly go. I was incredibly shy as a child.
Really?
Oh my God. Yeah. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Now I'll just talk to everybody. But my parents are extremely social and they're business owners. So they just chat everybody up at the grocery store, wherever they were going. And so I think for me, there was a lot of just being in that osmosis environment of, oh, this is how they do it, even though at the time I was petrified of the way they interfaced with the world. I was like, oh, my mom's talking to someone in the grocery line again. Like, shoot me now. Oh my God. Um, and now like I see this real value in it, which is interesting. Um, and actually, I do remember one. This is funny. I've never thought of it this way. My dad used to, push me a little bit in some uncomfortable ways because I was really shy.
Mm-hmm.
And like one way that I always hated was he would make me go up to the meat and cheese counter at the grocery store and like order, how many slices of whatever by myself, which was just, I was like, oh, I hate this. But okay, that's how we're going to do it. But the glitch in the matrix moment was when I was about 10. I remember we went to a flea market, and I still have this tchotchke, but it was a little painted marble, a white marble with a rose on it, hand painted. And it was at this flea market, and this woman had all these beautiful marbles, and I always loved stuff like that. And I asked my dad if I could buy the marble, and he says, "You can, but you have to barter for it." And I was like, like, what do you like barter? What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, the person says it's $10, so you should ask if you can have it for $8." And I was like, terrified, like this is worse than the meat counter. And I had to do it by myself. So he was, he went to the next one over, and I went up to this woman and I said, "Would you take $8 for the marble?" And she said, "Yes." And I remember having this very visceral, like, you can do that? Like moment. And I think that was one of the first glitch in the matrix of like, you don't have to take things on face value. You can ask for something. And then actually the biggest glitch in the matrix for me was probably, yeah, it was probably when I was like 23-ish. I did some work with Landmark Education, and they are a personal development group, and they very much hammer home that it is all a story. And I was like, whoa, holy moly. Like, and life is what you make of it and the stories we create. And and I had started my tutoring company, but I was thinking about the charter school and like getting in that frame of mind of like, yeah, why not? Why not start a charter school? Why not, do these things? And I was sometimes practicing like what nowadays we call rejection therapy of just like asking people for stuff. Like I went into a Subway and I asked if I could have a free cookie, and they were like, "Sure." And I was like, wow, like they'll give me a cookie. Interesting. So I sometimes find like these little moments are pretty big on just like getting you to question things. And then lastly, on the self-concept side, I'm really big on like glitching myself out and being like, okay, I don't think I can, you know, uh, get on a motorcycle like my friends. Sorry, not my friends. Both my parents ride, and I was very different than my parents, and I would never like get on one. But just a couple years ago, I was like on the back of a friend of mine's motorcycle and was like questioning my self concept and was like, all right, like I'm trying something new here. Or, yeah, a couple years ago, I decided I really wanted to see if I could not just get through my fear of roller coasters, but could I actually be with myself with the feelings that came up while I was on a roller coaster. And so I asked a friend of mine if he'd like go on a roller coaster, like one of these like loop-de-loo
Mhm.
ones. And he's like, sure. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna like test out my meditation practice and see like what can I do like being with my subjective experience of being on a roller coaster. So I am often putting myself in those types of um experiences, and I notice I get like itchy and bored when I don't at this point where I'm like if I'm on coasting mode, like, oh man, like I got to do something that is going to help me question my self-concept.
I think everything that you just said is very interesting, but I love this. I think there's a weird, almost paradox where you want the glitch in the matrix moments, but they kind of have to be organic.
Oh, yeah.
They're usually an accident. I think there are some things that you can do to create the right conditions for a glitch to appear. It's almost like this like mystical thing that you have to summon. It's like, okay, if we like set the ambiance right and we like, say the right invocations, maybe it will show itself and maybe it won't. Maybe it will just, everything will be as it is and there's no hole in it.
Yep.
But I think that your dad telling you to barter was like he accidentally invoked a glitch in the matrix, but it wasn't necessarily, it's not as, one-to-one linear as I am going to have my child do this thing and then they will see.
And they will see the glitch in the matrix. Yeah. No, he was just trying to get me to not be shy.
But I think that you can do things that puts yourself or your kids in positions where they then question the nature of the world that they live in and how flexible it actually is. I think encouraging your kids to poke at things is really constructive, and it's not guaranteed that any of that poking will all of a sudden magically reveal the source code.
Right.
But it might. Yeah. And even if it doesn't, it's still going to give your kid the underlying frameworks to think about. Like, I think this is a very practical thing that parents can do on a daily basis of just, why is that thing this way? Let's ask.
Right. Let's talk about it.
Maybe we can bend this rule. Right. Like, why don't you go find out?
Right. And my colleague from the Charter School Innovations Academy, she's one of my best friends. She's 20 years older than I am and has 4 children who are now young adults at this point. I've known them since they were all little children. And she would do all kinds of things on a regular basis of like any sort. She's definitely someone who pushes up against rules big time. And so she's really embodied this ability to ask questions and to like see what happens if you don't like fully abide by the rules. And, even things like, all right, like it's safe. We're going to roll through the stop sign. Like, like just getting them to think a little bit differently about things. And it's like a very deliberate practice that she has in her family. And I don't know exactly how she cultivated that, but it was interesting to watch her raise her children. And they're very conscientious and considerate. And it's not like rule breaking because rule breaking is cool. It's more of this, hey, it's good to question things sometimes and wonder about why we do what we do and how we do. And hey, sometimes it's okay to go through a red light. Like it actually makes sense to do this sometimes. Dead of the night, 2 a.m, the light's not changing. Like
you've looked both ways,
cool,
nobody's
right, exactly. Like, and I think for her, what she's really trying to do with her children is to instill in them that like it's okay for them to make their own decisions about rule sets. Not some like Machiavellian way, but in this more like you can trust yourself way instead of having to trust authority way.
I haven't thought about this consciously for a while, but now that you bring this up, this is something I do this with myself all the time too, is I'll find little, like I'm not, the rejection therapy thing I'm not as good at, which probably means I should do more of it. But the bending of rules or the conscious choosing to or not to adhere to rules in ways that are, I'm not, I have no interest in being difficult to anyone else
same.
or like getting in anybody else's way.
Sure.
But if there's nobody else around and you're in a parking lot where it's like, there's very clear you're supposed to drive one way up and down and like snake your way through till you find a spot. It's like, I see a spot, I can pull in and just like back into the space.
Right.
Going the wrong way. And there's a part of me that feels uncomfortable with that because I know I'm not supposed to.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well now I have to do it because there's nobody there. I'm not in anybody's way.
Yeah.
But you just have to like remind yourself, like I do this really regularly. It's like just like little things to just like bend the rules to remind myself that all of the rules that I'm complying with, I'm doing, it's my choice to do it.
Right.
That I am deciding to, I am voluntarily adhering by your rules because it's uncomfortable for me to deal with the consequences of not.
Right.
But I'm choosing to do it. I'm not actually being forced.
Yeah. And you might choose differently in the future.
Yeah. I may be choosing between two unpleasant options, but no one's forcing me. And I think that's a really important thing to remember in life in general, but especially if you want to live a life that is a little bit more creative and a little bit more curiosity driven and a little bit more on your own terms. I want to talk a little bit about your background too, because I find your story so interesting that you started out in education and then you became I'm going to say VC, even though I know you explained that like what you're doing is still very much education, but on the surface.
I'm an investor. Like I feel very comfortable with that now. When I first started investing, I would not call myself an investor. Actually, I was like very weary of that, and still
I will
very
wear no
weary
Patagonia.
No, not at all. Oh my gosh, no. It's like, oh, terrible. And the behaviors and the attitudes and all that. But now 8 years in, I feel very comfortable being like, I'm an investor. But the journey has had lots of twists and turns. What I often tell young people is that, at least for me, every 5 years of my life since I was 20-ish have been markedly different, and I could not have predicted where I would be. So this idea of, you pick a major and you're going to be this thing, and your first job is the type of job you're going to have for a long time, like completely defunct. And I think Gen Z totally gets that at this point. I'm just preaching to the choir there. But for me, it started, I did get an undergrad degree. It was the right path for me. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't take on that much debt. And the opportunity choices were not as flourishing as they are now. It's like, when I went to undergrad, I saved up babysitting money so I could buy myself like a clamshell laptop from Apple. It's like, we weren't going to be building a startup on that laptop. So times were quite different. But I did enroll. Actually, I didn't enroll. I got into grad school. I thought I was going to become a neuropsych person. And I had this very like aha moment. And that moment was just this thinking of, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be in school for another 7 years. I'm going to be almost 30 or over 30 when I get out of school, and I'll not have had a real job. And coming from a self-employed small business family, I was like, that's bizarre. But it was also interesting because my family was like, you're going to be the first person in the family to, go for something like a PhD, like, this is great. And I jumped off that train. And part of that jumping off of the train was also starting to work in clinical research. And I went through school. I thought that's what I was going to do, and I was going to love it. And then my job was to sit in a windowless room and fax paperwork to NIH all day. And I was like, wow, this is terrible. I saw patients once a month, and they were ALS patients, and we didn't know and wouldn't know for many years if we were helping or harming them with Topamax. And I was like, I don't have that level of delayed gratification to do this. And I wish I had an internship in that realm, like before I finished school. So I would have said, oh, I'm going to do something different. But it all actually worked out really well because I read this incredible book that sadly is out of print, but you can find used copies sometimes. It's called Zen and the Art of Making a Living. And I read it when I was 21. And this was another glitch in the matrix moment. The book was all about how do you make a career and a life for yourself when maybe you didn't get the degree in the thing of whatever that is. And it was a workbook. So you're going through and answering these different questions. And I was really thinking about what I was noticing going to my job in the hospital was I didn't put my feet on the ground and think like, wow, I'm so excited. Like, can't wait to go do this research today. And I remember saying to myself that, like, I didn't want to grow up if growing up meant just having a job to have a job, or like going to school because it's like the good girl thing to do, and all these different things. And I did this sort of workbook. And in it, they brought up these concepts that are so near and dear to 15, 17 now. Like, hey, you didn't get a degree in a thing? Well, okay, cool. Yeah, you didn't get your education degree? Well, you can start, as a tutor, or, hey, you love health, but, you didn't go down the med school route. It could look this other way. And that really got me thinking. And it also got me thinking about what are the things that I've loved doing, and what came to mind uh, was like one-on-one education with people, because I had tutored people in high school and college all the way through. It's just sort of like a side hustle kind of thing. Um, and I decided to get off the grad school train. I hadn't actually like fully enrolled, and said, I'm going to start a tutoring company, and see what I can build in that domain. All my friends told me that I could not make money with a tutoring company. And the best thing someone can do for me is tell me that I can't do something, because I am stubborn and I will find a way to like go around whatever you think. And especially having those self-employed parents, I was like, why wouldn't I be able to like make money and do this? And I built my own website and had to learn HTML and all these things, and learned about taxes and all this. And um, really loved working one-on-one with students. And it was sort of random that I started working with homeschooled students, but I had a parent reach out to me. This is pre-Craigslist being creepy. And I was A/B testing ads on Craigslist for all kinds of different tutoring things. And this one homeschool mom reached out and said, hey, we'd love for you to come teach algebra to our daughter. And she has a lot of anxiety in everything, just in her life. So, we want to give you a heads up there. And I actually started specializing in that arena. I started working a lot with children who had anxiety disorders, who were on the spectrum. Like, I'm particularly good with those populations. And then I really, by getting in with this one homeschooler, she opened the door to me of what that whole world was about. And I had read a lot about it and wanted to be part of it, but didn't know how to get in there. And it was so special, because I would go over their home and all the children would come running at the door. Oh, Danielle's here today. Can we do reading and science? And can you work with 3 of the other kids? Like, can you stay for 2 extra hours? And it's like, wow, this is so different than both my public and private school children, who I'm here to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. I'm here to do homework help. I'm here to try to catch you up in a subject that you're 5 years behind on, and keep you like up to date on what you're doing. Whereas the homeschoolers, it was like very much like, hey, here's the rough material, like, and we can do whatever we want, which was amazing. I'll fast forward the story a bit here, but that led into starting a charter school innovations academy with my colleague Christine Kuglin, who ran a homeschooling co-op. I started working with her because of another quick glitch in the matrix, which was that she called me one day. I don't know where she got my number. She said, I've heard you teach creative writing. I had never taught creative writing, and it was for 10-year-olds. And I just went with it. I was like, oh yeah, no. Oh yeah, I totally teach writing. That's great. Yeah. And started teaching creative writing in our homeschool co-op, which led to us starting our charter school that's now been running for 15 years. I learned quickly that being a administrator was not my personal dream and mission. Um, Innovations Academy is probably both like the best and most challenging thing I've ever done. I'm still on the board of the school. I'm going to go there on Monday for a board meeting. But after a couple of years of being a co-director, I knew it was time for me to sort of spread my wings and do something else. And I moved up to the Bay Area. I got a call from a friend. This is that like not applying for the job thing. I had made this assumption. I saw the fellowship launch, and I thought to myself, as someone who's an operator type, I was like, oh, they must have everything they need, because who would start a program without a staff and without testing a pilot? And, because that's how my
Michael
brain works.
Gibson and Peter Teal.
Right, yeah, exactly. And this woman, Lindy Fishburne, called me from the Teal Foundation, and her exact words were, Danielle, you have to get, oh, no, her exact words were, the foundation has lost its mind. You have to get over here. I was like, okay, wait, tell me more. She's like, well, you probably saw in the news, like they launched this program, but they don't have anybody running it. And I was like, who does that? Oh my gosh. Proceeded to interview with the foundation and came on board the following week from there. And worked with the fellows for 5 years, had some really incredible experiences. And then that's when 5 years in, we saw that real gap in the market of no one was serving people without college degrees, specifically calling it out and saying, not only do we want to work with you, but you are who we work with. And that's what encouraged us to start our venture fund, was this idea of we could scale the work we were doing in the fellowship, because as generous as Peter is, the program has remained about 20 young people per year. And we thought we could do more and experiment more with what we were doing, by having a more sustainable model to do it within the venture ecosystem. So it's been a lot of learning. We had advisors to our fund the first year that helped us get our chops up. But what we had was this novel idea and way of sourcing talent that other people didn't have. And that's what you need to have a good venture fund, because you can get the back end expertise. And one of our advisors, Shay Tate-Didana, I call her the Oracle, because especially during the first year, 2 years, she would come to our office every month and she would say something like, so have you started thinking about the annual meeting yet? And I was like, what annual meeting? Oh, we're supposed to do an annual meeting? Okay, great. So she would be putting things on our radar and telling us hey, these are the things you need to do to be a venture fund, but you're going to do it the 1517 way. And she would keep drawing us back into that of what's the 1517 way of doing this? And we had never worked at another venture fund, so our way was the only way that we knew. But it was wonderful to have those guides to be able to tell us, hey, here's what's coming up on the horizon. Here's what's kind of expected in those very, very early days when we truly had no idea what we were doing.
What types of people are you looking for now? So if someone is listening to this and they have an ambitious child, or they know an ambitious young person, or maybe they are an ambitious young person, what types of people are you looking to connect with, and in what different capacities?
Yeah, so we love to connect with young people who are makers, who are starting to, even if it's dabbling in making things, because we have a lot of community level support and events to bring those people in to, help bring that community together, show people what's possible, support on what they're doing. So yeah, we love hearing from people super, super early, because part of it's funny, sometimes people in venture will ask us oh, well, what do you look for? And, what are the check boxes of the things? And I'm like, no one likes to hear, well, I want to meet the person when they're 15 and invest in them when they're 21, or maybe 18, or we've invested in 16-year-olds at this point. But it really starts with that meeting young people who have different problems that they want to solve, who have started making in that arena. Sometimes we do hear from parents as well who, want to start getting their children involved with communities that are going to be supporting messages around high agency and autonomy. We have a contact form on our website that anyone can write into, and then we just sort of go from there. But really, yeah, people who love making and building, who especially have this eye towards a mission, of one of the questions sometimes we ask people is, what do you want to make absurd in 10 years? What would be something we'd look back and say, wow, I can't believe we operated X way in the world before this. And so that's more on the investment level, but people who, just are building in high agency, those are the people that we want to talk with.
We've danced around this through this entire conversation. We've said this implicitly many times over, but I think it's important to say explicitly too, maybe as a message to parents, but also just to anybody who interacts with young people at all. I think one of the very core things that I pick up on the philosophy that you guys have, and I think this is a commonality among a lot of the different innovative education models that I get really excited about, but it's particularly evident in the work that you do. You're taking young people very seriously. They have ideas about what they want the world to be, and you say, cool, teach me about it. You have expertise that I don't have, and we trust your capacity to go build something. As a culture, we really don't take our young people very seriously. And I think that's really sad. And I think that's really misguided. And I think that that's a really important piece of how you think about the work that you do that really needs to be emphasized too. We don't take our young people seriously enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, for me, that's the water that I swim in. So I take it for granted that we're somehow different than other people, even though I intellectually know that. And it comes out in the way that we talk to young people. We don't talk down to them. We don't act like we are the purveyors of knowledge or resources. And only if you're at this place will we give you something. Like for us, it's a bit more like the Harry Potter sorting hat of a young person comes to us and we're like, cool, maybe community is the right fit right now, or maybe they're a grantee, or maybe this other thing. And figuring out like, where do they slot into this? Because my purview, especially on the community side, is that if someone really shares our values and wants to make the world more improved, we want them to be part of that. And so sometimes within our founders, grantees, community, we take people who maybe are thought of by others as misfits, of like, oh, this person, they keep talking about this super specialized thing they love and we don't really get it. Well, no, that's like, we are the island of misfit toys. We are like, come home. Like, we're here for that. And I want to learn. I think this is something that I don't know where this came from in me, but even from a very young age, if someone is passionate about something, it gets me very jazzed about it. And so it might be something I know absolutely nothing about or traditionally had no interest in. But if that person is really jazzed about it, I could listen to them all day. And I think that is very true of our team, of that, like, we really want to hear people out. We want to ask them engaging questions. We believe in Socratic dialogue. And it is that way of being of, I'm not going to treat this person like they're lesser than because they haven't finished school or they're a certain age or, demographic stuff. Like, all these things come into play. And for us, it's more like we're coming in with curiosity of like, wow, like, who is this person now and who might they become? Like, how exciting and interesting. And for us, it's like this very special water that we swim in that I think we forget that it's very abnormal. And what we hear from the young people we work with is just how refreshing that is. And even actually for our founders who are in our more like deep tech thesis, maybe they've gone through the education system, maybe they're older, they're like, wow, it's really great working with you guys because you really want to hear what I have to say and do, and you're not making all these assumptions. And I talk to other VCs and like they're hammering home around why what I'm doing isn't going to work and all this stuff. And you all are just, you don't have to agree, but you're open. And I think that's particularly meaningful to young people who maybe have not experienced something like that before.
What about for parents or people who are in other types of supporting roles of young people who have young people who have some level of the curiosity and the ambition, but aren't quite as focused on a particular problem, or they haven't been bit by the entrepreneurial bug, or maybe they just aren't, being an entrepreneur is not really their goal, which is one of the things as a sidebar that I love about this whole community of renegades inside of this, anti-establishment, educational institution world, both that you're building, but also parallel organizations, is that you start to see there's this whole, strata of different types of ways that this plays out. Like, some people are building companies and then they have dropouts who are working at their companies. And then, there are people who are doing freelancing and people who are working in very traditional roles, but in things that they really care about without having taken the normal trajectory to get there. Like, there's so many different ways that this can play out. It's very dynamic. It's not just like you either drop out and start a company or you stay on the traditional path. But for people who have a young person in their life who's a little bit less, like, they're not quite there yet, or maybe that's not the path they want to be on, but a lot of this way of being still really resonates. Do you have advice for those people to support either in the process of helping a young person find their path, or just to expose them to what's possible? Because that's such a huge part of what you do, and you guys are so good at it.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind there in terms of support. One is being open and curious and engaging young people in dialogue about the things that are interesting to them. Another is connecting them with potential mentors and people also who have that like openness, like it might be someone in their field, but someone who's going to engage in a similar way. The question that comes up in my mind a lot is like, why not? Like, why not, you know, have this young person work on X, Y, and Z? And I even have a sort of crazy example where I have a mentee who I've known him since his high school, and he went through Berkeley and finished and was going to go straight into grad school. And he's like, I don't know, Danielle. Like, I don't know if I should be going straight into grad school. Like, I feel like I'm sort of too on the train. And I was like, yeah, tell me more about that. And he started talking about how maybe he wanted to do a gap year and do some different things. And he, he's in CS and but he was nervous that if he got off the CS train right now after finishing undergrad, that somehow he would lose something. And I was like, well, what else would you want to do? And he said, well, I'd want to study art more. And I was like, yeah, like I love when I hear people who are like going really deep down one rabbit hole, be like, I want to apply my rabbit hole skills to like a different arena. And I was like, like CS, like grad school is going to be there for you. CS is going to be there for you. Like you've already set yourself up to be at like a top of the food chain arena. Yes, you can take this kind of risk. And I texted him the other day just to see, like, did he do it? Like, I have no idea. And I don't have any horse in that race. It was just like, hey, like offering this, like, yeah, why not? Why not do that? And I got these great texts back from him. He's like, yeah, I'm in Rome right now studying art and I've been doing all this painting. And I'm like, yes, like this is amazing. And we had a young man in our office once pre-pandemic, similar, didn't have a degree, was a coder. And he came in and he started pitching us, on something that he was working on, but I did not hear the fire in the belly at all. And I've known this young man for a while, and I was like, and at this point in my career too, I've gotten very in touch with just being really honest about what I'm intuiting and checking in. I might not be right, but I want to check. And so I said, I'm not hearing the fire in the belly here. Like, what's up? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I've just been doing this coding thing for so long, and there's like other things I want to do. And I was like, yeah, like what would you want to do? He's like, I've always wanted to work on like a restoration ship, like for one of like these old sailing ships. And I was like, yeah, you should go do that. He ran out of our office like he was on fire to like go figure out if he would do this. I know that he ended up not doing that, but like just the idea of individuals who would support him and thinking very differently was different. He wasn't going to hear from anybody else. Like, yeah, go become a pirate. Like, go do that. So like those are a couple examples of ways to support people. I think another, especially with young children, and something, this is like my own, like, oh, I wish I had this for me. But like, and my parents were very supportive, but I also think there were areas where maybe they missed the boat a little bit of seeing, hey, my child seems to really have an interest in this area. Like, let's do a little more. Let's go further. Because the thing that we can do as adults for children is kind of see where something could go. And my like very silly example of this, but like there's like there's like this like, oh, what if question that keeps coming up for me about this. But when I was a kid, I loved to mash cake frosting, like especially different colors with each other. And I was basically painting with my cake frosting. But my parents never picked up on that. And we're like, oh, maybe like painting is a thing that we should like get into here. And I've always been like, what would have happened if we had gone deeper in that? And if they had scaffolded out to like, hey, we noticed that you're super into this frosting thing. Like, where can we go with this? And I think that kind of thing is a very doable thing for parents to do. I think what does get difficult in this day and age is there's this sense of there's so many things to do. Children are enrolled in so many structured programs now that there isn't that time to say, it's like, oh, birthday party's over, on to the next thing. And there isn't very much time to do that exploration in that play. And so I think that's something that families and parents can do a lot more of to foster creativity and where their children might go with something by just giving them more spaciousness, but then also giving them that support of, hey, where else might we take this strange little hobby that you have and go somewhere else with it.
I think it's very tangible. The examples that you gave, it's very, the through lines are very clear of how to put this into action. I think that's great advice.
I like to get down to brass tacks. I like to be very practical.
This is one of the many things I appreciate about you. Being very practical is very good. I am a big fan of your Twitter, and I am going to plug your Twitter here.
Oh, great.
But where else would you send people if they enjoyed this conversation and they want more of your content?
Oh gosh, more of my content.
Like, was there a contact form on the 15th?
Yeah, 17th? I know. I'm like, I haven't done, well, read Michael's book, Paper Belt on Fire. Mm-hmm. It's a really wonderful story about our work. And I also think espouses a lot of the values that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. We've written on Medium. We have articles on our website. I've done a lot of long form articles about our philosophy and how we think about things. And so going to 1517fund.com is a great place for that. And I was also just going to plug that for people who want to like understand more of this philosophy, I always recommend that people read Maria Montessori's Absorbent Mind, because the reference that she has for humankind and how she bestows that upon children is just one of the most honoring things I've ever seen. And so I think reading people who honor children help us to honor children. So people like John Taylor Gatto, John Holt, and so on are just like these greats. And if you read my Twitter, it's my vent machine for things, and it's not the whole picture. But you said yesterday at our conference, like, Twitter likes truth, basically. And what I found for me is like they like truth, and my truth tends to come out being like upset at somebody else. I'm like, this is wrong. I'm here to fight for X, Y, or Z. But I've been taking what you said actually yesterday at our conference to heart, and I'm like, ooh, interesting. What other truths do I have to put out there that don't have to do with like being upset about something that's happening? Because that particular brand has done well on that platform, but I'd love to do other things too.
Twitter loves content that is a little bit outrage-inducing or channeling people's frustration. Yeah. And I mean, if you read my Twitter, I spend a lot of time talking about, it's like, well, the system sucks because of this. Yeah. Right. And it gets, 300 likes, and everybody's like, yes, it does suck in this way.
Right. And I'm like, people should be conscientious about their futures, and it's like 8 likes. And I'm like,
well, it's weird because I've said the same stuff in like
different ways.
Yeah, I probably said school sucks in like 500 different ways in the past year on Twitter.
Totally.
And I just like, you just kind of like, you're training your own internal algorithm too of like what language not only summarizes what I'm feeling in a way that's true for me, but also in a way that's true for other people. Like it hits the same nerve, because language is an approximation, right? Like I can't just say like, I feel sad and now you feel my sad too. Like you don't know what kind of sad I am. Yeah. If I'm like the inside of my chest, like right here, like right next to my heart is like, there's this like really like nagging feeling. And it's like, there's like something like is missing right now. It's like, it's not like I need this thing desperately. It's not like deep existential sad. Yeah. It's not like deep mourning sad. It's just this little bit of like, oh, like I wish this thing is here that isn't, or this person is here that isn't. It's like now you feel it. Yeah. And it's like, there's like a transmission. I don't know if you're feeling the same sad that I'm talking about. Like you could be feeling a totally different. You're like, oh yeah, it's just like that one time that my friend moved across the country. I'm like, no,
you're like, it's not that way.
It's like the time that my friend didn't come out with me tonight, and I like was sad she wasn't there. It's like different sad. But you like try to get closer. So you say something, you're like, okay, like is the person's facial expression changing? Is there like, does their body language change? Like they seem to get it. It's approximation close. Yeah. And it's, you don't get any of that feedback on Twitter. It's just likes and comments, but comments are actually really helpful. But I just like kind of dialed in on the things that I really care about. And then I just say them in a bunch of different ways. And you could look at it and be like, that's really redundant, but I actually don't think it is, because I'm saying
you're reaching different people.
Exactly.
Because different people are going to hear the message in a different way and from different messengers, which sometimes I personally find annoying, where I'm like, oh, really? It took saying it this way for people to get it? It's like, oh, what a bummer. But I think it's a really good strategy of like, hey, I'm trying to get this message across. Let me try many different ways, because there's many different ways people are going to hear something.
Yeah, and it's also to the tweeting about things that you're annoyed with too. One of the things that I do, I wish I had longer to talk yesterday and like actually, I was like, here's like very high level, but this is like not like, I can't explain to you like the whole process of like what to do with this, but like go have fun. But I think like one or two layers deeper to just like, you know, tell the truth is oftentimes I'll look for things that will bring the truth to the surface for me. So if I'm, because, you know, I'm very focused on spending time on Twitter. So I am invested in building an audience because I can reach a lot of people and be helpful. So it's just like an ingrained habit that like, you know, multiple times a day I open up Twitter and I say something. And sometimes I'll open it up and I'll be like,
there's nothing here right now.
I don't have
the well
thoughts.
is dry.
Yes. And so I'll start scrolling and then someone will say something and I'll be like, I don't agree, or I don't like that, or I don't think that's true, or I don't think you said that correctly, or I agree with you, but I would have said it in this other way because you're missing something. Right. And instead of just like angry commenting, I'll be like, oh, this like hit a truth for me. And now this truth is coming to the surface. And now I'm going to go like say that thing that is true for me as like a totally separate thing. And no one will ever know that this is like inspired by random tweet that the algorithm fed me 5 minutes ago over here.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. I spend way too much time thinking about this because I find the art of it really fun. It's like I think all these things, but then how do I communicate them?
I don't know. Getting our messages across is important. And so iterating on how one does that is an art.
Yeah, it's a science too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a little more art than one would like it to be very scientific.
Sure, I bet, right? If it were just like Tuesday's high engagement day. All right, that's what I'll do.
I mean, they're actually on Saturday mornings are high engagement day.
Absolutely.
But anyway, I would recommend your Twitter. I think I enjoy reading your takes, and I would highly recommend people check out your other content too, because there's everything that 1517, but like even your website is amazing. I go in, I'm just like,
we had a lot of fun making that new website because we told actually in the design crew that made it was one of our old grantees who started his own design firm, because over time he just kept getting, you know, he's like, I'm trying to build these companies and those aren't going where I want, but everyone keeps telling me my deck is incredible. And then he's built this design firm and it's called Godling. And they've done really, really well with it. And so I went to Tanthai, who's our old grantee, and was like, hey, we'd love to work with you on decks that we build and our new website. And we said, we do not want it to look like any other VC website. And myself and Michael are products of the 80s. And so we're like, okay, we want to have like these elements and different things and different references. And they just really got us. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that filed away for future branding projects. That's good to know. Danielle, thank you so much for taking time out of your trip to Austin to come here and do this. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, so much fun. Yeah, thanks for having me today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.
Oh, thanks.
All right, that's a wrap for this week. Thank you so much for being here. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave a 5-star rating. Ratings are how this show gets discovered by other people, and it helps me bring in better guests. And no matter where you're listening, please like and subscribe to the show to make sure you don't miss a future episode. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next week.